Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start the study session now with concerns that we had over the photosynthesis quiz.
Like the different cycles and like the names and stuff.
Okay, so some other questions we had are the different cycles. Like, when you say different cycles, what do you mean by that?
Like
do you know?
Like the whatever.
Calvin cycle?
And
yep. Okay. So we're going to call that parts of photosynthesis. And there are multiple names for them. And that is something I think threw people for a loop. For example, Calvin cycle is also called light-independent reaction and dark reaction. Okay. Anything else to pay particular attention to or that really kind of like threw you that you want to make sure we cover today before we start? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a slideshow. We're not going to go into every single detail on here. I'm only going to hit a few points, but I think it's always nice to just kind of have something to look at on here as well. And sometimes there are good diagrams. So we are talking about photosynthesis. And so what kind of organisms undergo photosynthesis? Plants. Now, there's another word. I know it's really hot in here, isn't it? If you need to prop a door open, you can. There's another word for plants that we use. We used it at the beginning of the year with Africa. These are plants that can they make their own food? Can plants make their own food? Yeah, so what do we call them? Producers. They are called producers, but there's another even more fancy scientific word we use, autotroph. And so if you see autotroph or producer in a question, we are looking primarily at plants. Yes, there's some other organisms that can fit under this umbrella of these terms right here. There's some protists that can and whatnot. But for our purposes, think plant. Got it? Don't get tripped up on the vocabulary. And so here is a picture of just lots of autotrophs. And so when we're looking at photosynthesis, we're taking light and stuff from air, and we're generating life because we're generating energy, and all life needs energy. Okay. At this point, do you get scared when you see the photosynthesis equation? You feel comfortable. So let's just practice identifying things. Okay, here we have words up. But if we didn't have words up, what is CO2? H2O.
Water.
Okay. This right here is just expanded out 6 times to make this, okay? So here we go. Carbon dioxide, water. What's this? Glucose. This is just a simple sugar. Okay, these are the parts that make that up. And oxygen.
Oh.
Hey, on the left side, I call them ingredients sometimes, but what's the more scientific word for what's on the left side of the equation? They're not just called ingredients. Reactants. And so there is another part that I think trips people up because you might see the word reactant. What is a reactant for photosynthesis? What is one of the ingredients for photosynthesis? And there was another word that we used called a raw material. Anyone remember that from the quiz?
Yes.
Yeah. Did that trip you up a little bit?
Yes.
A raw material just means what are the basic building blocks? Okay, before we do anything to them, the basic building blocks, what are those reactants? Okay, so these all mean the same thing. What do we need for photosynthesis to occur? So what do we call the stuff to the right of the arrow? Products. That's the most scientific one. Now, next year in chemistry, you will spend so much time talking about reactants and products. You'll never use any of the other terms. Okay? But products are what's on the right. That means what is made. Yeah.
Wait, so the raw materials are what we need for photosynthesis to happen?
Yep. Before they're processed. When it says raw, it means like before anything happens to them. So before anything happens to that water and carbon, or before things happen here and change these 2 things to glucose, they're referred to as raw materials. And then they'll be processed into glucose. Okay? Now remember, I said I'm going to skip through some of these slides. We don't need to know this. Don't freak out on this slide. I just need to get to next
I have
slides.
a question. What is the difference between that equation and the other equation? I'm so confused.
The top and the bottom?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. So this is one molecule of carbon dioxide, 2 molecules of water. But in reality, we don't find glucose with just the CH2O, this simple carbohydrate. We find it in this form. And so it's all about what we call balancing equations. And
That's like the singular,
yes.
and
So
that's the more.
yes, you will not see this.
Wait, so we don't need to copy the top
No.
one at all?
No, all I want is you guys to be familiar with this one. And please just understand, the reason we have 6s here is because glucose has 6 carbons. And in order for us to have those 6 carbons, we needed 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. Because now we have 6, which means that we had to have more of the other stuff. I don't want you to stress about how to get to the 6 because when you're in chemistry next year, the big part of what you're do is balancing equations and figuring these coefficients, these numbers out. As long as you recognize the formulas, you'll be fine.
So the reactants would be the carbon dioxide and water, and the products would be the glucose and oxygen.
Yes, now can you say the same thing using words other than reactants and products?
The raw materials are the carbon dioxide and water.
Yep.
And the output is the glucose and oxygen.
Yes, I like output. I'm going to put that over here too. Okay, so we're going to start using them in different contexts and different ways. So we're getting the main ideas, but we're using them in different ways. Okay. Now it's not going. Okay, so I'm skipping this fancy one. I'm not going to spend much time on here because you guys know, where does it take place at? What organelle, what part of the cell does it take place? The chloroplast. I did a picture, we did a picture quickly one day, and we have these little things called the granulum here that are made of little thylakoids, and we have the stroma. We modeled it with our ping pongs and stuff. Don't get stressed out about the structure. Do you understand? Okay? You just know chloroplast, and if you see these words, no thylakoid or stroma, know that it has to do with a chloroplast. Okay? I won't ever ask you to label them. Okay. Let me get to any. Go. Okay. So now there was I drew this out one day kind of a different way than what you had already. This is a beautiful picture of the overall process.
Are we drawing that?
Can you understand this?
No.
No.
Then let's draw it out.
Oh.
Okay.
The whole thing?
Or if you want to snap a picture with your computer and
No.
take
Can
it,
we take a picture with our phone?
for sure.
That's easy. Well, I'm gonna draw it too, but I just want to take a picture.
I need to draw it, but I also would like a picture.
So this is a suggestion. I'm going to go through this quickly. This is going to be, you guys, I'm going to be putting this out on a puzzle. For those that are not here, they're going to have to watch it, and I'm going to be checking that they finish it.
I'm drawing this down.
For those of you that are here, you guys can still refer back to it, but I'm not going to check to see that you watched it. Does that make sense? But if you need to go back, because I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, you can. Got it? My suggestion is before next Friday, it might be good to see if you can sketch this out and kind of understand it. Got it?
Is the test
Try
next
sketching
Friday?
this out before next Friday. Next Friday.
Okay. But isn't that when we're doing the in-class study session?
Next Wednesday.
Okay.
Outside. We don't have an in-class study.
Okay, I thought you said we may do that. in
Yeah,
class.
we're not.
Okay.
Okay, so all this is telling us is think about our reactants. What are the reactants that we need for photosynthesis to occur? What are our reactants, which are also the same as our raw materials or ingredients? Carbon dioxide. So we have carbon dioxide going into our chloroplast, right? What else do we need? Water. So we have water going into our chloroplast. What else do we need? Light. So do you see how this is showing us that all of these reactants or raw materials are going into the chloroplast? Okay, so that's nothing big. Now, when that happens, do you remember when we modeled it one day and we modeled the light reaction? I'm going to divide this in half. we modeled what's called the light-dependent reaction. What does it mean to depend on something?
You need it.
Uh-huh. You need this light in this part of the reaction. And think about this. When we modeled it and we had our little fuzzy balls that were going down and we had our tickets and stuff like that that we were catching.
I didn't get it.
Okay.
I couldn't see the whole thing.
Okay, there was someone, and it depends on which hour, that was at that end with a flashlight. Do you remember the flashlight person?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had a flashlight. That flashlight, that you were this light. Okay? And when that flashlight was coming in, there was also what coming into me?
Water.
Water, right? Because someone was over here spraying me. And when that light and that water came together, that light splits that water, and what happens to that oxygen? What happened? I remember I had that little poof of air. Because what happens to that oxygen?
It goes out.
It goes
Wait, what
out.
are the light reactions?
Okay? So light-dependent reaction is the first part here. It means that light, it depends on light. The light splits light energy, splits water. It takes a water molecule and it kind of breaks the bonds. Okay, it breaks those bonds. And it happens at a place called chlorophyll. Have you heard chlorophyll?
Yeah.
Chlorophyll is just the pigment that kind of captures that light. That says, hey light, I'm going to hold on to you. Come to me. Got it? Easy to remember, chlorophyll, chloroplast. So the light energy splits the water molecule, which means it just breaks the bonds. It doesn't care. The plant does not care about this oxygen. Okay, when it splits, it gets rid of it. It does not want that oxygen. So it releases the oxygen. Yeah.
When you put H2O in it, when it goes straight in, what comes straight out of it is the oxygen, right?
Yes. So what's left?
How do you?
Okay, so this hydrogen here, I'm just going to write this here, okay? Got it?
Okay.
I'm just going to leave the hydrogens in here.
Okay.
It keeps the hydrogens. Something's going to happen,
Okay.
but the oxygen splits off.
Okay, thank you.
The point is oxygen leaves. Got it? Plant doesn't want it. Plant doesn't really need it. It might use it for cellular respiration later, but for this part, it doesn't need it. And so if it's a product that we don't need, that's not needed, what can we call that product? Yes. So sometimes this could be referred to as a product, sometimes a waste product. And sometimes, have you heard the word byproduct? A byproduct, have you heard that word?
No.
A byproduct is what is made when you're trying to make something else. It just happens to be made in addition. It's not really the goal here of photosynthesis, but it happens to be made. And I'm writing all these words down so you can get used to the vocabulary no matter how you see it in a question. Okay? So the sunlight, it depended on the light. The sunlight came in, split the water molecule, oxygen left because we don't need it, but it leaves these hydrogens. These hydrogens hitch a ride on I call these taxi cab molecules. Can I call them taxi cabs?
Yes.
Remember we talked about the taxi?
Oh yeah.
If it has a D, no, that doesn't make sense because there's a P plus. These two right here are taxis, meaning they're molecules that carry things. Got it? So they'll pick up these hydrogens, and do you see how there's an arrow here? And so now NADP plus becomes NADPH because it picked up a passenger. It picked up a hydrogen. Okay? Same thing happens here. I'm not going to get into the details right now between ADP and ATP and the hydrogen in that part because we're going to focus on it in cellular respiration. But can you think about it as basically we're having these taxi molecules that are going to take the hydrogen to part 2 of photosynthesis. Because it's this hydrogen and it's this ADP. It's these two molecules right here, the hydrogen and its taxi cab, and ATP, a little bit of energy that's generated, that are what we need to give the energy for part 2. Okay? So part 2 here, I'm gonna use blue. Part 2. If this is the light dependent reaction because it depends on light, do we need light over here? Do you see light coming in over there? Do you think it's dependent on light then? So what is the opposite of dependent? So we call this reaction the light independent reaction. What's another word? If it doesn't need light, if it's not like the light, it needs light, right? So it's going to have to occur with sunlight in the light, doesn't it? So if it doesn't need light, where can it occur at? The one that doesn't need light, where you don't see light. Is it on the left or the right?
Okay, so
Independent. Yeah. So this, hold on. This goes all the way down. So think of it as the left. Step 1, step 2. They're both the 2 steps of photosynthesis. Yes.
so if it goes in like a circle,
Mhm.
like is it
Yes.
going in like a circle? Like
It
the
would. Well,
ATP, and then it goes. How does it go from in there back out to?
these little taxis, just like a taxi or an Uber driver, it can move around. So it's going to drop off its energy, and then it's going to go back up and pick up H's and more ATP and come back, so it can run the cycle again. And then the taxi and Uber is going to go back out, and
So those never change. They're just gaining this and then making it into sugar.
yes, this is what we need to make the sugar. This right here is this is what we need to make the sugar. This is what we need to power this one in the middle.
Okay.
Okay. All I'm gonna say is go back through this. Look at if you haven't done the Amoeba Sisters or the packet, try that before you go back through
We have to
this.
turn those into you,
Those
right?
help.
Did they help?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to turn those into you.
And I'm gonna see them.
Okay.
Macy.
So the Calvin cycle is part 2.
Yes, and I was gonna get to that. So the Calvin cycle is also called the what?
Light independent.
Yes, because it does not need it. So this is part 1, the light reaction or the light dependent reaction. It can be called the same thing as long as there's light involved. In part 2, we don't need light.
Wait.
So it's called the light independent reaction, or because this fancy scientist who did a lot of research on it had it named after him, we call it the Calvin cycle too. You'll see it depending on the question both ways. And there's one other one, Mia, I want to talk about. There's another way it's sometimes referred to. This one takes place in the light reaction.
Mhm.
Where do you think this one will take place?
In the Calvin cycle?
The dark reaction. So sometimes it's called the dark reaction. I don't like that. Some textbooks don't use it, but some textbooks do. Sometimes you see it that way. So this could be called the second one, dark reaction, Calvin cycle, and light independent reaction. They're all the same thing. They're just 3 different names for it. And for something like that, if you need to make a flashcard, then do it. Okay? And that part, I hate memorization things. But this is one of those things that it's just more memorization to try to understand that 3 names for the exact same thing, and we don't know how we'll see it. Macy.
Those on the test.
Mhm.
Wait. So the first part is just it only has one name.
Well, technically, too, it could be called light reaction or light dependent reaction, but we don't
Okay.
call it. It's not named after a scientist like this guy is.
Okay.
Okay, so that one's a little bit easier.
I have 2 questions. Okay, for the chloroplast, is that what you're talking about? The product, waste, product, byproduct?
No, oxygen.
Okay, and then what do you mean by that? Like
When the oxygen, see how the oxygen is sent out of the chloroplast because the plant photosynthesis,
Yeah.
we don't need oxygen for anything.
Mhm.
So it is produced, but we don't need it. So the plant's for the plant, it's considered a waste product. We use it, but for the process of photosynthesis, it's not needed.
And then
Does that clarify it?
yeah, on the drawing, where would the light independent reaction take place?
So like when it's the thylakoid in parts of the chloroplast like that, it's in the what we call the stroma.
Okay.
It's in the stuff. It's in the jelly. So it's in the space.
Okay.
And here's that stroma word. So it's like the space. I will
Okay.
not ask you which part stroma versus thylakoid. Okay? I will not
Okay.
ask you which part of the chloroplast. Got it?
Okay. So one is.
Did you just say figure it out?
Yes.
Okay, Alex.
What's like the NADP plus used for?
It's just a transport molecule. It transports these hydrogens that were split from the water over here. And then what's going to happen is it's going to release the hydrogen, okay? And I haven't really talked about the cycle yet, but it's going to release the hydrogen, and that energy, it provides a little bit of energy and provides some materials that are needed to drive this cycle, to make this cycle go around. If this hydrogen does not make it over, then we can't do this part of the photosynthesis. So as soon as it drops off this hydrogen and it gets rid of this hydrogen, it will be back to NADP+. It will go get another hydrogen and bring it back here so this part can go on. Okay? So in the Calvin cycle, what's important here is we have these hydrogens and a little bit of energy coming in, right? From the first part, this is all from part one. These two parts are from the first part. But now we are also using that carbon dioxide, and together it rearranges the bonds here, puts a few of those molecules together, and makes sugar. Okay? But it's going to need to be powered in order for those bonds to break and rearrange. And when you get it, if you ever take higher level classes, you'll learn like there's these little intermediate molecules, but you don't need to know that. All you need to know is this energy and this hydrogen helps CO2 to rearrange itself to produce sugar. And you can kind of remember that CO2 is part of the dark reaction or the Calvin cycle because look at the carbons. The carbons are just in a different form. Yeah.
So it takes the hydrogen from this and then it makes the sugar with the CO2?
Yep.
Then how does the H get to? Like it's like H2, but it starts with the O having 2. Like
This oxygen?
yes.
Okay. And I don't want to get into the balancing equations. Okay? So remember how I told you you'll never see it like that? Let's just get rid of this. Let's call it the glucose that we've learned it is, okay? So if that's the case, how many molecules of this carbon dioxide are going to need to rearrange to give you this, do you think?
Wait, what?
If you have one molecule of CO2, one C, 2 oxygens here, but you're going to be breaking these and rearranging them to come up with the glucose that we learned about, how many of those carbon dioxides do you think you'll need?
6.
Does that make more sense if I leave it like this? Then let's just do that. Got it? Okay, Macy.
So to make the sugar, they take the carbon from the top and the hydrogen, so it's carbon and hydrogen make sugar.
What else? This oxygen we need. We didn't need the oxygen from here. Got it? But we need the oxygen from here. Does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, can everyone take one more picture of where we're at? Because I'm going to go onto the slide and all of this with the extra writing on it is going to go bye-bye.
It'll be on a video, right?
It will be on the video, but better safe than sorry. What if the quality, you can't read it or something like that?
What'd you say, Macy?
Okay, can we print it out and type?
Yeah, can we?
Probably.
No.
How many pictures do you need? She literally just
Extras.
Needs the whole video.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So I think right now, I am going, so the last thing I want you guys to take away from this, and I'm going to stop this because I'm going to do a quick Kahoot before we leave. And the reason is, yes, we could spend a long time here, but I want you to practice with some questions. The last thing I want you to add to this picture is it is the dark, the second part of photosynthesis known as the dark reaction or the Calvin cycle, or the light independent one, which is really where that sugar is made. Okay?
Yeah.
Does that make sense if I say that?
Yeah.
The sugar is actually made in the second part, the dark reaction. Okay, so go ahead and log into Kahoot because we're going to try now. Some of them will be easier, but some of them, I intentionally, the wording is maybe a little different. Wording is maybe like the quiz. Wording is maybe like something else. But I want to see if you can start applying it. Got it? And if you guys get the answer right, we're just going to go on. But if we have a question and we're like, what the heck, then we'll stop and talk about it.
Roger.
This is so not the one I want. Just joking. Did I forget to save it? Hold on, oh no. I'm going to